Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of this Top 10, matches that should have happened at WrestleMania. Now, before we get into the Top 10, I'm going to preface this by saying that we're not talking dream matches like Ultimate Warrior vs. John Cena that could never feasibly happen. We're basing this on one guy has to be on the roster. One, if not both participants, have to be on the roster at the time the WrestleMania happened, and we're going to say specific time frames. And also, or be a free agent and be able to be picked up to be put on the roster. So, along with that, we're also going to say the WrestleMania it should have happened at, or WrestleManias it should have happened at. Could have. Some of them fall for a specific time frame. Some of them are dream matches that could have happened at any time. We're going to start off with our number 10. Hulk Hogan versus Roddy Piper in either WrestleMania 1 or WrestleMania 2. The feud is what brought him to the WrestleMania level. And I understand they did the tag match at WrestleMania 1. And that was different. That helped sell with the celebrity involvement, but they could have just as easily put Mr. T versus Orndorff in another match and had that same appeal, where they could have had Hogan and Piper as the main event of WrestleMania 1, or the storyline was still built for WrestleMania 2, where we didn't necessarily need Bundy attacking Hogan. We could have had Piper versus Hogan at WrestleMania 2. My opinion, it was a feud that brought him to WrestleMania, so they should have been able to at least give Roddy Piper one solo shot at a WrestleMania main event. Number 9. Jerry the King Lawler versus Bret the Hitman Hart at WrestleMania 10. Now, I know what you're saying. WrestleMania 10, probably one of the great WrestleManias of all time. Why would you mess with that card? And I understand the Bret Hart version, because in the main event, Bret Hart versus Owen, great matches. The Bret Hart versus Jerry Lawler feud that happened the summer before and was put on hold because Jerry Lawler got into some legal issues could have easily been picked back up. He could have had Lawler could have been inserted into the title picture. I mean, the shame of it is that Jerry the King Lawler doesn't wrestle a WrestleMania match until WrestleMania 27, well past his prime and well past his well past the time that most fans remember him being great. And this was Lawler probably as close to his prime as he was ever going to be in the WWE, with his biggest rivalry in the WWE. Could have made a great WrestleMania match, or even the main event of the show. Could have been Hart could have won the title somewhere else, maybe Royal Rumble, and had Hart versus Lawler, King versus Championship for the WrestleMania main event. Now, number 8. The Rock versus Ric Flair, WrestleMania 18. Now, we all know WrestleMania 18 is Rock versus Hogan, so you'll see another twist on this a little bit later, spoiler alert, in this top 10. To me, the better match with a guy coming over from WCW in a dream match, in my opinion, would have been The Rock versus Ric Flair. Two more similar style wrestlers. I would say, two of the most charismatic wrestlers of all time, if not the top two. I think their chemistry would have gave us a different match. It wouldn't have been the same as the spectacle of Rock and Hogan was. But I think it was a match that we could have had and could have been awesome in its own right. Number 7. Mankind versus Undertaker, anywhere from WrestleMania 13 through 16, which 16 is WrestleMania 2000. They don't actually call it 16. This, to me, was The Undertaker's best feud in his career is against Mankind. They put on classic matches, the Boiler Room match, the King of the Ring match. anytime you put the two of them against each other, they delivered a memorable classic match, and Mankind should have had the opportunity to challenge at some point the Streak. It could have been, I know Mick Foley says he didn't get that many opportunities to have a WrestleMania moment. This could have been his taking for a WrestleMania moment. I think personally it would have went up there right within all of the rest of their matches. It probably would have been, and I mean, just imagine what these two would have done at WrestleMania based off what they've done in other pay-per-views. Now, our number 6, the potential for the two greatest tag teams to, in my opinion, ever have done it face each other would have been the Road Warriors, the Legion of Doom versus the Dudley Boys. And I think it could have happened anywhere between WrestleMania 2000 and WrestleMania 19. Now, during this time frame, Road Warrior Hawk was still alive. They came in for the one show where they wrestled, I think it was Kane and Rob Van Dam. To me, this was a match that should have happened. You should have had the old guard, the Road Warriors versus the new guard, the Dudley Boys. You should have gave everybody. At some point, these two teams should have met each other. We should have had a match that says, we're going to see who the greatest tag team of all time is already. And by the time these WrestleManias roll around, the Dudleys already were multiple-time world champions. And they were putting on legendary matches with everybody they met at WrestleMania. I think it would have been a great match, if nothing else, for the pure spectacle. Now, our number 5 is CM Punk versus John Cena, anywhere from WrestleMania 27 to WrestleMania 30. We've seen Cena and Punk wrestle several times on pay-per-view, most famous being Money in the Bank in 2011. But I agree. I mean, imagine if the main event of WrestleMania 27 was CM Punk versus John Cena instead of Cena versus Miz. I think it would have been way more positively reviewed, way more, the fans would have been more into it. Then you got the two matches with The Rock, with Cena and The Rock that could have been replaced. And even at this year's WrestleMania, I think if you could have placated CM Punk by saying, hey, this year we're going to do you versus Cena for the title. And I believe he would have even stayed for that, because the one thing he never got in his career was that WrestleMania main event, which is what he strived for. I think we were robbed, one of the best feuds of this century. I think we were robbed of not seeing it on its biggest stage. We got to see Austin versus Rock on the biggest stage. We got to see other huge rivalries take it to the biggest stage. Shawn Michaels and Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart got to use that platform. This should have been a platform for these guys as well. Now, our number 4 is Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Goldberg in either WrestleMania 18 or 19. 18 we had Austin versus Scott Hall. 19 we had Austin versus The Rock in the third of their 3 WrestleMania matches. I just think that Goldberg, if he would have came in a little bit earlier, stayed a little bit longer. This was the match that wrestling magazines were hyping during the Monday Night Wars. Who would win, Stone Cold or Austin? Stone Cold or Goldberg. This was a match that the fans wanted to see, that they were clamoring for. I'm not a Goldberg fan. I would have loved to have seen it myself. I think the timing was right. The place was right. The stage was right. Unfortunately, it never happened. Coming off of that, our number 3, Undertaker versus Sting. Anywhere from WrestleMania 17 to WrestleMania 30. I think if it's done anywhere past the streak being over, I don't think it's as special as it would have been during the streak. I think Sting would have came in, had instant credibility to be a guy that could challenge a streak. For one thing, would have been a guy that had instant credibility with the fans, it would have been the flagship of WCW versus the flagship of WWE clashing, kind of like the Austin Goldberg match I just mentioned a moment ago. It would have gave The Undertaker, if he would have won, it would have gave him another notch in his belt in his historical run. Sting would have won, same thing. We would have got to see the match that basically everybody for the last 15 years has wanted to see. That's Undertaker and Sting on the biggest stage of them all. Now our number 2 is a callback to our number 8. And kind of a callback to number 4 because WrestleMania 18 was involved in that too. Hulk Hogan versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. The reason we talked about number 8 with Hogan and The Rock being replaced with Rock vs. Flair is Hogan should have wrestled Austin. No knock on The Rock and no knock on The Rock's star power. He's one of the biggest to ever do it. But arguably the 2 biggest wrestling icons in the history of the business are Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin. They should have been able to clash. They should have been able to put differences aside and come up with a match where we seen the 2 go at it one-on-one to see who the greatest is. It's a simple concept, folks. It's the same reason we want to see Legion of Doom versus the Dudley Boys. It's the same reason we want to see Sting versus The Undertaker. We want to see the people that are considered to be the greatest go one-on-one with each other. Unfortunately, depending on what story you believe, there are several reasons as to why this didn't happen. We'll leave the rumors and speculation to that, just rumors and speculation, but it's one that definitely should have. Now, before we get into our number 1, we do a little thing here on these top 10 countdowns, sorry folks, called Best of the Rest. Basically what it is the things that were considered for the list but just barely missed. In other words, basically above number 10. Now, in no particular order, these were also things that were considered. Bret the Hitman Hart versus Jim the Anvil Neidhart at WrestleMania 8. We never got to see that feud of the Hart Foundation. We never got to see Bret versus Jim. We seen a little bit of it when Bret wrestled against Owen and Neidhart took Owen's side. But they should have had a big payoff match, in my opinion, and they should have had that end of the tag team. Bret Hart goes on to be Bret Hart. Jim Neidhart goes on to do something different. I understand that this is the WrestleMania 8 that Hart beats Roddy Piper to become Intercontinental Champion to start his ascension to the top. But to me, it would have kept Neidhart in relevance and kept him. You would have had Neidhart becoming relevant and continuing on and being a big-time heel. Fortunately, they chose not to do it. Next up, also set at WrestleMania 8, also 2 tag team partners that really didn't get the WrestleMania payoff, although they did have a feud. Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels. The Shawn Michaels-Marty Jannetty feud arguably was the hottest feud in the time at in the WWE. They could have easily had a match at WrestleMania 8, although Marty Jannetty started having personal demons affect him. So, fortunately, the fans were robbed again of seeing Mr. WrestleMania Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, who a lot of people use him as a punchline, but they seem to forget just how gifted and talented of a wrestler he actually was, and how great of a match this was, and how great that feud was, and how great of an angle it was. Jannetty could have continued on for years. If he didn't have the personal demons, he would have continued on for years as a higher mid-card talent. He was that good, just unfortunately he became a liability. Now, last but not least on our Best of the Rest, CM Punk versus Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30. You could add CM Punk, or you could have Daniel Bryan win the Royal Rumble instead of Batista. And you could have had Punk and Bryan on the main event of WrestleMania, something that the wrestling fans all around the world would love to have seen. Their match at Over the Limit 2012 was one of the great matches of the last 5 years. Their rivalry could be traced back just like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart's was to build the story for them. I mean, the story writes itself, basically. You got Daniel Bryan riding a wave to become the best wrestler in the world, and you got the guy that calls himself the best in the world. Both from similar backgrounds, both with a cult following that became a major mainstream following. It easily could have been a show stealer. It could have ended. Left WrestleMania on a high note. Unfortunately, CM Punk left WWE shortly before this. However, I'm among the belief that if CM Punk was told he would have been a main event at WrestleMania 30, he wouldn't have left. At least not that soon. Now, before we get into our number one, if you think we put up something too high, put something down too low, or left a match that you would have loved to see at WrestleMania off the list to get altogether, let us know what you think. Hit us up on Facebook, hit us up on Twitter, put it down where? Down in the comments. And make sure you share and like this video as well. Now, our number one match that should have happened at WrestleMania, Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair at WrestleMania 8. We've mentioned WrestleMania 8 a couple other times. Probably one of the worst WrestleManias of the 30 that have gone on so far to the date of this video being recorded. I would put it in the top, in the bottom 2 or 3 in my opinion. WrestleMania 2 and WrestleMania 27. This one, maybe WrestleMania 9, although I enjoyed that much better than WrestleMania 8 in my opinion. Just the fact that for the whole entire decade of the 80s, we had speculation of Hulk Hogan, the champion of the WWF, Ric Flair, the champion of the NWA at the time, and then WCW, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, Wrestling Observer, any wrestling magazine or wrestling newsletter. At the time, there wasn't internet quite yet. Anything that hyped up wrestling, this was the dream match for almost a decade. You finally had the two guys that carried the ball all the way through the 80s, Hogan and Flair, in the same organization at the same time, and you don't pull the trigger on the match. In my opinion, it would have been one of the biggest matches of all time. We see a couple years later, they do the match in WCW, but it didn't ever quite get the stage it deserved. Hogan versus Flair should have been the main event of WrestleMania. It is the most glaring omission, in my opinion, of any WrestleMania match ever. Hogan versus Sid fell flat. Flair versus Savage was a great match, but it wasn't Hogan versus Flair. As great as Savage is, and I like Savage more than both Hogan and Flair, in my opinion, I think he's better than the two of them. Just my personal opinion. I'm more of a fan of his than either of these two guys. But this was the match. This was the match the fans of WWE wanted to see, that the fans of the NWA/WCW wanted to see. This is the thing where, in the 80s, there were two kinds of fans. There were WWF fans and NWA fans. The NWA fans said Ric Flair is the best. The WWF fans thought that Hulk Hogan was the best. This was your time to see the two go at it to prove really who was the best wrestler in the world. Alas, it didn't happen. Unfortunately, very disappointing that it didn't, but it really, really should have. 22 years later, I'm still upset that this match didn't happen. I still don't understand. And the rumors are that they did house shows and the crowds didn't respond well to it, that northern crowds didn't know who Ric Flair was. I answer that with WrestleMania is a global event, and Ric Flair was known worldwide. Do you know how many people in the North just buy WrestleMania because it's WrestleMania? Because how many WWE fans just buy it just because it's going to be WrestleMania, no matter what the matches are? You add the Ric Flair fans in for the buy-in to see Flair versus Hogan. You add the international crowd who already know both men. And any questions you have about Ric Flair being more widely known, which people, I don't get. Everybody, I think, knew who Ric Flair was. Even WWE fans knew who Ric Flair was. Anyway, they dropped the ball. They missed what I think could have been the greatest, if not the greatest main event at WrestleMania, one of the 2 or 3. But it didn't happen, unfortunately. And that's the focus of this top 10. The top 10 matches that should have happened at WrestleMania, but didn't. Basically, that's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of Heel Heat.